And Israel as a nation state did fight physical wars. Joshua was sent to conquer the land of Canaan, to wipe out the Canaanites. And God had the authority and the right to order him to do that. Now Joshua didn't have the right to do that, because Joshua was not the Creator. Only the Creator has that right. But when Jesus Christ came, He didn't come the first time to set up another Israel throughout the earth. His servants were not to set up a Christian kingdom on the earth by force, the way Joshua was to do, set up a theocratic Jewish nation by force in the land of Israel. Christ makes it clear here, my servants are not to fight. And what these crusaders tried to do in a perverted form of Christianity was to set up a quote-unquote Christian world into existence. Now, where we left off last time, before we get to the Crusaders, we left the Jews in the Byzantine Empire. Now, if you remember, Constantine made Christianity legal. Remember the date? 313 AD, Edict of Milan. That made Christianity effectively the state religion. Very quickly it became the national religion of the Roman Empire. Constantine did another thing. We talked about it last time. He split the Roman Empire, remember? East and West. Istanbul, old name Constantinople, was the capital city of the Eastern Roman Empire, sometimes called the Byzantine Empire. Constantine and his successors ruled the Byzantine Empire. And you saw on your map, I've done two maps again for you this week, because the last one, I didn't do these, I found them on the internet, so it's not my technical drawings. But if you look at your map there, you'll discover Istanbul is here, Constantinople. The Eastern Roman Empire ruled over this whole region, including Armenia, what's called Israel, Jordan, Syria, right up into Turkey, and right across to the edge of Turkey at Constantinople. So that was the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire very quickly collapsed. And that led to the advent of the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, becoming very, very powerful. Okay? What happened in the West? Some people have asked me that. What was happening in the West after the Western Roman Empire collapsed? Well, what happened in the West was that all of these various groups competed through the centuries for power. Different lords, different kings were fighting one another, trying to take over each other's territory. And the Pope was in the middle, acting as a kind of political master, playing one off against the other, and making himself stronger and stronger and stronger as the Bishop of Rome. There was no emperor that ruled over the Western Roman Empire, and eventually the Pope became that de facto emperor. But in the East, Constantine, to go back to the East, Constantine and his successors ruled over the Byzantine Empire. And that empire lasted from the 4th century until the end of the 15th century, just before the Protestant Reformation. So it's a long empire, 1100 odd years. Some other force started to arise at this time, from the 7th century onwards. Look at your notes. I've called it Muslim conquests. Who was the force? Muhammad and his followers. Now, if you look in your map, Muhammad started out in Saudi Arabia, Mecca, down here. And very quickly, in the 7th century, Muhammad and his followers began to conquer the Arabian Peninsula, this whole area here, the Arabian Peninsula. And then they began to spread their empire. And of course, the next empire that they hit up into was the Byzantine Empire. Very slowly but surely, they began to conquer all of the land of Israel or Palestine, Syria, and eventually into modern-day Iraq and Iran. Now that's why, in the end, when you go today to Iraq, Iran, those countries, they are Muslim countries. Because of the spread of Islam through the conquest of Muhammad and his followers, his successors, from the 7th century onwards. Now, the Jews were living in three places, effectively, under three empires, or three groups of people. One group of Jews was living in the Western Roman Empire, under this mix of kings and pope. The other group of Jews was living in the Byzantine Empire, under the Byzantines. The other group of Jews were now living under the control of the Muslims, after Muhammad and his followers had expanded their empire up through the Middle East. So the Jews were scattered under three great powers, or three great groups of nations and peoples. And this may surprise you, but it won't surprise a Jew. If you go to Israel and talk to a Jew, they will tell you this very bluntly. The group that treated the Jews the best down the centuries were not the Byzantines or the Roman Catholics. The groups that treated them the best were the Arab Muslims down the centuries. In fact, Jews remained under Muslim control for more than 1,000 years, peacefully, relatively peacefully. It was only until 1948 and the establishment of the State of Israel that all the Jews left Iraq and Iran, for example. They were there for centuries, trading, living peaceably, practicing their religion by and large, having toleration by their Islamic leaders. The greatest empire before the Second World War was the Ottoman Turk Empire, who ruled over Palestine and the Middle Eastern region. And they treated the Jews very well. They allowed them to fully practice their religion. And the Jews look back with nostalgia, even today, on how the Muslims treated them down the centuries. And now that surprises us because of what we read in our newspapers of what happens today between the Muslims and the Jews. But that was not always the case. The greatest enemy of the Jew in the last 2,000 years has not been the Muslim, has been the Christian, or so-called Christian. They have put more Jews to death, persecuted more Jews than any other religion. Now, when Constantine took control of the Holy Land, Constantine Christianized all the holy sites. And when we were there just recently, we went to, for example, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That was a church built by Constantine's mother, Helen, or Helena. So, Constantine didn't do much for the Jews under the Byzantines. But in 636, Jerusalem fell to the Muslims. 636. So Constantine had it under his control when he started the Byzantine Empire from the 4th century until the 7th century. So roughly 300 to 400 years. It was under the control of quote-unquote Christianity. Greek Orthodoxy or Eastern Orthodoxy controlled the city of Jerusalem. But in 636, the Byzantines lost the Middle East to the Muslims. Now, if you go back to your map on the first page, you will see this is not a very good map, but one of my problems is I have to try and find one that's black and white, and that was as close to black and white as I could. You will see that Islam spread from Saudi Arabia after 632 under Muhammad and spread up and took control of all this area of Iraq, Iran, and all the way to Pakistan. Islam took control. And westwards from Arabia, Saudi Arabia, to Egypt and North Africa. That's why today countries like Libya are Muslim countries. Countries like Egypt are Muslim countries. That all happened in the Muslim conquest under Muhammad, and after the death of Muhammad, his followers who took the Islamic religion into all those regions. Now, in 636, they conquered the Holy Land and drove the Byzantines back up to modern-day Turkey, effectively. Pushed them right way back to the borders of what we would say are modern-day Turkey. So the Byzantine Empire was greatly reduced in size, greatly reduced in power, and greatly constricted in its wealth, because it had less people, less tax, and the Middle East was where all the great trading routes from east and west came through. So it lost a lot of wealth, a lot of power, and a lot of prestige, the Byzantine Empire. Now, it still lasted another 1100 years, or 700 or 800 years from that time onwards. But it had lost the great power that it once had under Constantine, the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire. The Muslims not only spread through North Africa, but you'll see on your map, they got into what's called Iberia, Spain and Portugal. Spain and Portugal, if you were to go there today and visit the Roman Catholic cathedrals and churches, those churches were once mosques. Because the Muslim armies went from North Africa up into southern Europe and conquered southern Europe for Islam. So you can see from your map, the Islamic armies or the Muslim conquests really controlled the whole Middle Eastern region, and were even eating into what we would call mainland Europe, taking control of many parts of mainland Europe. They were at the borders of the Byzantine Empire and trying to push into the Byzantine Empire, what was left of the Byzantine Empire. So what's going to happen? What's going to change? Well, before we talk about the Crusades, why the Crusades came about, we need to discuss what happened to the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox churches. Do you remember when Constantine split the empire into East and West? The Byzantine Empire was a Greek-speaking empire, predominantly Greek-speaking. They spoke Latin, of course, as well, but their first language was Greek. The Western Roman Empire was Latin-speaking. Okay, they spoke Latin as their primary language. So the two churches that emerged from the split of the empire, one became the Eastern Orthodox, a Greek-speaking church. Today we call it the Greek Orthodox. The Serbian Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox are all daughter churches of that Eastern Orthodox church. Armenian Orthodox as well. The Western Roman Empire, the Latin-speaking part of the empire, predominantly Latin-speaking, that became the Roman Catholic Church. And even today, the Roman Catholic Mass is said in Latin in many Roman Catholic churches, because it's a Latin-speaking church. That's its base, its foundational language is Latin. And the Pope today speaks in Latin. If he gives a speech, a theological speech, he normally gives it in Latin and writes it in Latin. You might find that strange, but that's because of the history. So the two churches were split, linguistically. One church speaking Greek, the other church speaking Latin. Another big difference. In the Eastern Roman Empire, the Greek-speaking church, the head of that church was Constantine. He made himself the head of the church. So the emperor was head of the state and head of the church. The bishops of the East served the emperor. He was the king. King of the church as well as king of the empire. In the Western Roman Empire, because of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, not long after the split between East and West, the Pope didn't have any king over him. He became the king, effectively. He orchestrated the politics of the Western Roman Empire by playing off one group against the other group to make himself the most powerful man in the Western Roman Empire. Now, that didn't happen overnight. That happened over the centuries. Then there were theological disagreements between East and Western Church. Some of us were in the Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox churches in Israel. And I pointed out to the group that you don't see any statues. You go to a Roman Catholic church, you see all these statues of Mary, the Virgin Mary, and the saints, and they will pray to them and venerate to the statues. But when you go to a Greek Orthodox or a Russian Orthodox church or a Serbian Orthodox church or an Armenian Orthodox church, there are no statues. They do not believe in worshipping statues. They have what they call images, icons. They are pictures. No three-dimensional images are allowed. Statues are allowed in an Orthodox church. Just a picture, image. And you can have that in your church, but you are not allowed to have a statue of a saint or of Jesus Christ or of the Virgin Mary. That's another difference. They also disagreed on other points of theology, like the leavened bread. Should you have leavened bread or unleavened bread in your Lord's Supper? They also disagreed on the Holy Spirit. Does the Holy Spirit proceed from the Father or from the Son? There's a theological division between them, argument, and they still argue about it to this day over that point. So, from the split under Constantine of East and West, from the 4th century to the 11th century, the two churches gradually grew apart. They gradually disagreed in more and more things. They gradually became more and more rivals against one another. To the point where we came to 1054. It's called the Great Schism of 1054. What happened in 1054? The Roman Catholic West, the Church of the Roman Catholic West, split, divided from the Eastern Orthodox Church of the Byzantine Empire. That happened in 1054. Now, how did it happen? It happened because the Pope sent some of his representatives. He calls them the emissaries. The papal legate is the technical term. And they were sent to the Eastern Church. And they asked the Eastern Church, they didn't ask actually, they demanded. They said to the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church, you must accept the supremacy of the Pope over not just the West, but the East. Now, what do you think the Eastern churches said? They said, get on your bike. No chance. The Pope is not supreme over our churches. He's the Bishop of Rome. He's not the Bishop of Constantinople. He has no authority to reign over the churches of the Byzantine Empire. And the Roman Catholic representative said this: if you do not submit to the authority of the Pope now will excommunicate you from the true church, because they believed they were the true church. What did the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church say? He said, okay, I'm going to excommunicate you in response. So both sides excommunicated one another, and it's called the Great Schism of 1054. Now, we live today in 2015. That division, that bitter division between the Eastern Orthodox churches, today they're called Russian Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, because of the break up of those nations into nation states, but they were once called the Eastern Orthodox churches. That bitter division between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church is still in existence. Both have joined the World Council of Churches, but both still can't get along with one another. Many popes have tried to reach out to the Eastern Orthodox churches to get them to come back to Mother Rome and make them one big church. But every time the Eastern Orthodox churches say no, we will not bow the knee and make the Church of Rome the supreme church, or the Pope of Rome the supreme leader over the Eastern Orthodox churches. And I say that division continues down to the present day. So that explains the great schism of 1054. And you have to understand that to understand what happens next with the Crusades. In the 7th century, Islam, or the fighters of Islam, conquer the Holy Land. Palestine, Israel, Jerusalem. By the 11th century, after the great schism between East and West, the Muslim forces had already pushed their way up through the Middle East into the borders of Turkey, modern-day Turkey, trying to push into modern-day Albania and Eastern Europe. So, if you look at your map, front page map again, here we are in the 11th century. The Byzantine Empire is just this tiny little empire left now. Basically, 2/3 of modern-day Turkey. That's all that's left of the Byzantines. The Western Roman Empire, controlled by the Roman Catholic Church, effectively, most of Western Europe. The Islamic Empire controlled not just the Arabian Peninsula, all of the Central Asia, right up to Kazakhstan, all those countries. North Africa, Spain and Portugal, and they were trying to push into the rest of Eastern Europe. Now it looked as if Islam, in the long term, was going to win. Because they had the biggest empire now, they had the greatest amount of money, and they probably had the greatest number of soldiers at this point in time. So human wisdom said, unless the Byzantines and the Western Roman Empire soldiers get together and do something, the forces of the Muslims are going to just take over all of Europe. And probably they would have. Probably they would have. But what changed? After the Great Schism in 1054, you will discover that, if you go to page 3, the leaders of the Byzantine Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, realized they had to do something fast, or their empire was about to disappear. What did they do? They decided to cozy up to the Pope, Pope Urban II. And they sent letters and they said, you know, we're all brothers, we're all Christians, we're all friends. We need your help to come and rescue us from the challenge of these Muslim forces. Join with us in this crusade. And not only that, they pointed out that Jerusalem was now no longer a Christian city. It was now, for the last 4 centuries, controlled by the forces of Islam. And Christian pilgrims were being hindered from going to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, or the Easter ceremonies, and the Christmas ceremonies. Now what happened, let me just pause for a second as well. When the Muslims took control in the 7th century of Jerusalem, they did tolerate the Christians and the Jews to live there and practice their religion. But the problem was, not every Muslim ruler was the same. There was this group called the Seljuk Turks. They are the ancestors of modern-day Turkey. The Seljuk Turks, who are the modern Turks who live in Turkey, are not from Turkey. That sounds confusing. Where did they come from? They came from a place called Kazakhstan. You may or may not have heard of that. It's way up in Central Asia. they began to move westwards, the Seljuk Turks. They embraced Islam. They were not forced to embrace Islam. They converted to Islam. And then they began to expand their empire westwards. And one of the countries they eventually conquered was Israel. And they took the city of Jerusalem from other Muslims. And they began to treat the Christians and the Jews there very badly, particularly the Christians. Kidnap them, enslave them, kill some of them. And news of this got back to Western Europe. Now, of course, there was no internet in those days. There was no CNN. So news tended to go slowly, but when it got there, it tended to be exaggerated, didn't it? There was no newspapers. So news got back to Western Europe and to the Byzantines that the Holy Land is now a dangerous place for Christians. In other words, in fact, the news got back that Christians now are being persecuted for their faith. So the Byzantines wrote to the Church of Rome, the most powerful force in Western Europe, and said, come and join with us to drive out Islam. Drive it back from the borders of the Byzantines and drive it out of the Holy Land. Now, Pope Urban II heard that cry, that request. And of course, historians disagree on why he decided to launch the Crusade. What was his greatest motivation? But Pope Urban was motivated by a number of things. Number one, the Western Roman Empire was falling apart because of factions, tribal kingdom factions. So the Franks, as they're called, the Knights, the Crusader Knights, they kept fighting with one another, killing one another. And Western Europe was in danger of destroying itself. So the Pope thought he could solve this by sending all these ruthless soldiers to the Holy Land to fight there. That would be the solution to this problem. Get rid of the troublemakers. That was one of his motivations. Another motivation was Islam had already come up into Spain and Portugal, and it was a direct threat to the Church of Rome itself. And of course they knew that if Islam conquered the Byzantine Empire, modern-day Turkey, the next step for the Muslim armies would be Western Europe. And the Pope himself would be under threat. So the Pope had a vested interest in getting the Western Europeans to go on a crusade to fight against the Muslims. He had his own vested interest. But a third reason, big reason in the Pope's mind was this. What happened in 1054? The Great Schism. Why did the Great Schism come about? Because the Eastern Church refused to submit to the leadership of the Church of Rome. And now here we have the leadership of the Eastern Orthodox Church writing, pleading with the Church of Rome, particularly the Pope of Rome, to come and rescue them. Now, politically, that gave who the upper hand? The Pope. And the Pope saw this as a golden opportunity to draw in the Eastern Orthodox Church under his rule and his authority. And the Pope Urban II got up and he proclaimed the call for a holy crusade. And through his message and through the preachers that he sent round Western Europe, 60,000 men volunteered to go on a crusade to take back the Holy Land from the Muslims. Now, who were these men who volunteered? They were a mixture of two groups. One group was the Knights, the powerful leaders, political leaders of Western Europe, who fought with one another for supremacy. They were one part of it. the Crusades, Crusade army. The other group, where we would call the scum of the earth, those were the common criminals, the people who had no future, the people who had no money, the people who went around stealing and murdering and robbing. And you see, Pope Urban was a wonderful propagandist in advertising this war, because you know what he said? He said, if any person goes on this crusade to deliver the Holy Land, all their sins will be forgiven. And they are guaranteed a place in heaven. So that's a winning formula, isn't it? Now you just put your shoes. If you are a guy who's been living for 20 or 30 years, stealing and raping and plundering in Europe, and the spiritual leader of Europe says, you have a guaranteed ticket to heaven, everything you've done will be wiped out. And furthermore, where you're living is probably quite boring. You're going to go on a great adventure to the Holy Land where Jesus walked. And you're going to go down in history as the army that reconquered the Holy Land for Christianity. Can you imagine what a marketing gimmick that was? And 60,000, mainly of the worst, most ruthless, most bloodthirsty, most godless, most immoral groups of men in Western Europe signed up to join the crusade. Now, it took them almost 3 years to get to Jerusalem. Why did it take them almost 3 years? Well, 60,000 men do not move very quickly. They were a very undisciplined group, by and large. As I said, they were the rabble, the scum of Western Europe, many of them. And as they went through the journey from France, mostly they're from France, all the way through to first Turkey, to Constantinople or Istanbul, to join the Byzantine armies, what do you think they did? They had to get food. They needed money. There was no government to open the coffers and hand them money, so what did they think they did? They just took whatever they wanted. Now, there was one group of people living in Western Europe who were not Christians, or at least not nominally Christian. What group was that? The Jews. The Jews. And many of the Crusaders reasoned this way. They said, why bother going all the way to Israel to fight unbelievers? We can kill a few on the way here. We can get started now. And furthermore, who are the rich people in Western Europe? The Jews. We can make a few dollars before we even get there. And as they made their way through Western Europe, particularly through what's called modern-day Hungary and Germany, they massacred the Jewish communities, burned their synagogues. I mean, after all, the Pope had promised them a place in heaven. Didn't matter what they do. They might as well take advantage of the immunity. And they killed at least 25,000 Jews on their way to Constantinople. As well as that, of course, they fell out with each other. They fought with each other and fought with anybody who resisted them on the way. And then when they got to Constantinople, they eventually linked up with the Greek armies, the Greek-speaking armies of the Byzantines. But when they got down to a place called Antioch, some of us travelled to Antioch a few years ago. It's in modern-day Turkey. It's where the first church was. They conquered that city, this combined army of the Byzantine army and the Crusader army. And what did the Crusaders do? They said to the Byzantines, take yourself off. We're taking control here. And the Byzantines argued and fought with them, and eventually the Byzantines took control of Antioch, and the Crusaders were forced out from Antioch. Then they went to a place called Edessa, near modern-day Antioch, and they took that city. They took the city of Nicaea, Some of us were there as well when we visited Turkey a few years back. They took control of there. But eventually, they found themselves in the Holy Land. They had made their way. After butchering everybody in sight and fighting with one another, they eventually made their way, these Crusader armies, to the Holy Land. And the biggest prize of all, Jerusalem. The icing on the cake. Now, when they got to Jerusalem, Jerusalem had been taken over by this point by a very mild Islamic ruler who gave all kinds of privileges and rights to the Jews and Christians who were living there. In fact, when the Crusaders attacked the city of Jerusalem, many of the Christians and the Jews fought on behalf of the Muslims. But when the Crusaders laid siege to the city of Jerusalem, and you'll see the journey here on the map. So they make their way from France, you see, all the way through Germany, through Hungary, killing all the Jews they could find on the way. They eventually get to Constantinople. Then from there they make their way down through Antioch into the city of Jerusalem. And they reached Jerusalem in June 1099. Easy to remember date, isn't it? June 1099. 99. After a very short siege, they broke through the walls of the city of Jerusalem. What did they do when they got there? They got every Muslim they could get and killed them. They got every Jew they could get, put them into their synagogues and set the synagogues alight and burned them to death. It said the streets of Jerusalem were flowing with the blood of both Muslim and Jew, and even some Christians that resisted them. They took control of Jerusalem. They made it a Crusader city, a Christian city, and news went all over the Roman Empire. Jerusalem and the Holy Land are now in the hands of Christianity. And people flocked from all of Western Europe, pilgrims, to visit this Holy Land. What did the leaders of the Crusades do? These knights, most of them returned back to Europe, Western Europe. The leading knights became rulers of these cities, Antioch and Edessa and Jerusalem. One man was offered the monarchy of Jerusalem. He said no. This man who was one of the leading crusaders, Godfrey of Bouillon, a Frenchman. But he died just the year after the Crusaders took control of Jerusalem, and his brother became the king of Jerusalem. His brother didn't have any such spiritual sensitivities. He said, I'll be king. If my brother doesn't want to be king, I'll take the title, King of Jerusalem. And not only did they take control of Jerusalem, they set up all these Crusader kingdoms. You see them mentioned there, and your page 5 of your notes. The county of Edessa, the principality of Antioch, the kingdom of Jerusalem, and the county or country of Tripoli, modern-day Lebanon. They took control of Lebanon also. And that's why when you and I, the group of us, went to Israel, we visited a number of places, and the guide was able to say, that's a Crusader church. That's a Crusader fort built by the Crusaders. Because that was when they took control of the land of Israel and all the region round about, and made it, quote unquote, a Christian empire. So Christianity, quote unquote Christianity, controlled all of Western Europe, all of Eastern Europe, Russia, all the way down through modern-day Turkey, the Byzantine area, all the way down through the Holy Land to the borders of the Arabian Peninsula. That was all under, quote-unquote, Christianity. But there's going to be a big problem coming next. And we'll look at it in another day, not next week, but another week. Here's the problem. Western Europe is a long way from Israel. Long, long way. The Arabian Peninsula is very near Israel. Most of the Crusader knights got on their horses after they had conquered Jerusalem, went back home to boast in their great success and to be treated like heroes in their hometowns and home cities. The Arabian Peninsula, the Muslims were not dead. The Arabs were not wiped out. They started to regroup and build up their forces once again. And the so-called Christian West and East didn't have enough soldiers to really protect Israel and the borders of Israel from the forces of Islam. And what's going to happen in the next few centuries is a man called Salah ad-Din, the greatest Arab warrior, is going to rally all the Muslims of the Middle East and the Arabian Peninsula. And he's going to produce this great fighting force. And they're going to head north to take vengeance on the Crusaders who murdered their people when they conquered Jerusalem. And that's why you'll discover in history there wasn't just one crusade, there was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, plus a whole lot of other crusades that they don't refer to as crusades. Why? Because Islam is not going to lie down and die. When the Crusaders conquered Jerusalem, they're going to come back and fight them again. And this time Salah ad-Din, when he returns with his armies, will really take control of what's called Palestine or Israel today. But that's for another story. What were the Crusades? They were not Christianity. They were political, economic games being played out by the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church for their own ends. They were not some Christian force sent to do the work of Jesus Christ. They may have had a red cross painted on their shields, but they were nothing to do with the cross of Jesus Christ. That was the Crusades. The Christian, so-called Christian force of the Middle Ages. At the beginning I described them as Roman Catholic jihad. That's what it was. That's what they were. Roman Catholic jihad. That's the Crusaders. Plundering, murdering, butchering people in order for their own political ends and well-being. A shameful chapter in the history of the West and of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Let us pray.